They say it's putting money on someone's head, ordering an assassination, and they bang and bang and bang and bang and try to make it fit. Of course, it had nothing to do with that. We all know what that was about. And that gang investigators do it too. No rules, no initiation, no jumping in, nothing that is synonymous with gangs as we know it, letting whomever wants to be part of the group in on their own terms, out on their own terms. Worldwide, people identifying with YSL, and they bang and bang and bang and try to make it something it's not, and label it a hybrid gang. Think about the FedEx video. How many different versions did we hear? How many different hypotheticals from the state? Oh, no muzzle flash, must have been shot inside the car. Oh, well, no GSR, must be shot from outside the car. Oh, well, the windows were just tinted, can't roll down the window, must have opened the door. Oh, no GSR, must have been cleaned. Oh, no evidence of it being cleaned, it must have been vacuumed. Oh, or maybe scientist Colvin with the GBI, maybe he tested it incorrectly. Maybe he only dabbed on certain parts that didn't have GSR, as if GSR all accumulates in one little spot, as if it's not a plume, as if it's not all over an object where it's shot. These are all their theories that they try to use. Oh, the GSR must have fallen off in the bag, the sealed bag, this bag that was sealed and protected from the elements, just like every other piece of evidence they use in prosecutions of other cases. Just throwing stuff out there. Just continuing to try to bang, 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 bang. Just make it fit. Make it look good. It's never going to fit because it's not the truth. They don't have an explanation of why that car did a U-turn. There's only one logical explanation. They don't have an explanation for that negative GSR test. They don't have an explanation of why their own witness, a doctor, the ME, said that upon that shot, all bodily control would be lost, and we see the brake light go on and off 3 times after Shannon Stillwell's gone. They don't have explanations, but they just want to bang, bang, bang and try so hard to make it fit. I've had enough of the hammering. I've had enough of the square peg. I've had enough of their narrative and their theory. It's been a year. It's time to put the hammer down. Let's follow the evidence and not the state's narrative. If we follow the real evidence in this case, not what they're trying to sell you, you will come to the conclusion that the state has not proven count 1, conspiracy to violate the RICO Act beyond a reasonable doubt, and you will return the only just verdict in that case and find Mr. Stillwell not guilty. If we follow the evidence and not the narrative about count 2, Donovan Thomas, you will find that the testimony, the uncorroborated testimony of admitted liar Kenneth Copeland and admitted liar Quindarius Zachary is woefully insufficient. That there's reasonable doubt all over the place, and you will find Mr. Stillwell not guilty of count 2. And if we follow the evidence, you will find that not only has the state not proven that that Shannon Stillwell shot Shamel Drinks. Not only have they not proven that beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's crystal clear that Mr. Stillwell did not commit that crime. And the only just verdict for counts 49 through 54 will be not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time and attention.
Counsel, approach real fast for me. All right, I'm trying to figure out timing. I know y'all were told that this might be a late day, and it's going to be a late day. We're going to hear from Mr. Weinstein. We'll have a quick break, and then we'll hear the state's close, and then we'll be done for the day. We'll come back tomorrow and get the instructions. All right, go ahead, Mr. Weinstein.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Weinstein, as y'all know, and I have the pleasure of representing Deamonte Kendricks, along with my co-counsel, Katie Hagerty, who's sitting back there right now. Mr. J. Apt also represents Mr. Kendrick, but he can't be here right now. And good afternoon, Your Honor, and good afternoon, counsel. I am thrilled to finally be able to speak directly to you all. We've seen each other in the hallways, we've seen each other in the break room, and here in court, but I haven't been able to address you directly. The first thing I have to say is thank you. Thank you for your time over the last year. Thank you for your attention. It is sincerely appreciated. And I am going to do something that you have not seen much of. I am going to try to move at a brisk and deliberate pace and not take up any more of your time than I need to, because I think we have already taxed that enough at this point. I know that your time is valuable. I know you want to be able to spend the holidays with your family. I would also like Mr. Kendrick to be able to spend the holidays with his family without the weight of this trial hanging over him. So let's get a move on. You have heard a bit about Deamonte Kendrick over the course of this trial. So I want to just talk about him for a few minutes. As you heard, Deamonte, first of all, he originates from Miami. He came from Miami, he moved here. But he was a football star at Grady. And he had a scholarship to UGA to play football. That's a path out that a lot of people take. That is a path up. For a lot of folks in Deamonte's situation, the path out is football, either as a career or as a scholarship opportunity to get a college education, to make a better life for yourself. And then another alternative is often music. And while he had that chance to go to UGA, it got derailed. And it got derailed through something that was at no point Mr. Kendrick's responsibility, but it got derailed. So he had to look for something else. And what did he look for? He looked for music. He turned to music because he didn't want to live in that life anymore. He wanted to move beyond it. But yeah, he made some mistakes back then. He made some mistakes back in 2015. And he has paid his price for that. He has paid his dues that he owed society for that. And since that time, he has done nothing but turn to his art, turn to his music, writing lyric after lyric after lyric, laying down tracks. But instead, of allowing him to move on with his life, he has become sucked up in this targeting of Jeffrey Williams and has become collateral damage. And these attacks and use of his lyrics against him, the use of the lyrics against Jeffrey Williams, is frankly shameful. It's an attack on the First Amendment. And there's been so many rights, so many notions that I think we hold dear as a nation that the state has simply swept away. So why has the state taken a year of your life away from the work that you enjoy, the family that you love, your travel, your vacations, your children, grandchildren, parents? Why have they done that? What has been the point? The state told you in their opening that there was a point. And the point was that Jeffrey Williams was the head of a wolf pack. That is what they told you. But I don't think anyone sitting in here has seen that. You'll make that decision, not me. But I don't think anyone has seen that. What have they proven about Jeffrey Williams? They have proven that he was a man that through incredible hard work, dedication, and talent came up out of Cleveland Avenue. And instead of forgetting everyone back there, instead of leaving them behind, he tried to reach out to those people that were friends of his that he came up with and say, you don't have to live this life. You can come with me. You can get into music. You can hone your craft. I can take you on the road with me. I can take you out of this. And some people took advantage of that and pulled themselves out, took advantage of Jeffrey's help. Some people tried to do that and failed, and Jeffrey Williams sent them back home. They didn't succeed. And Mr. Kendrick took a hold of that. And Mr. Kendrick took advantage of that opportunity that Jeffrey helped him. But instead, law enforcement put a target on Jeffrey Williams' back. Because God forbid anybody pull themselves out of that. Because what does society want to do? Drag them back again. Never let them leave their past behind. God forbid someone leave that behind and pull themselves up from their bootstraps. That's what we tell ourselves as a country. If you work hard enough, you can pull yourself out. Let's see what you guys say. So I would argue that we have not wasted your time here for a year. I'm going to argue that the state hasn't wasted your time, that this court hasn't wasted your time, and that we can salvage something out of this year that we have taken from you. And that is to send a message. And you're going to send a message by going in the back, looking at the evidence that's presented to you, and I think any review of that evidence would have you come back with findings of not guilty on all the charges against Mr. Kendrick. Deamonte Kendrick is one of Jeffrey Williams' best friends. And as I said, he's a casualty of law enforcement's war on Jeffrey Williams. Mr. Kendrick is charged with racketeering, murder, and several other charges, about 4, all relating to drugs and guns that were found at Jeffrey Williams' house when Mr. Kendrick was over there visiting. What evidence, what testimony, what witnesses, what physical evidence has the state shown you that Mr. Kendrick committed these crimes? I would say almost nothing that you've seen in this courtroom. Sure, they've played some videotapes, but what have you seen from this witness stand? Nothing. When this case began, we stood up here in opening and we told you the state would not be able to present evidence against Mr. Kendrick. We told you They're not going to be able to show you guns tied to him. That there would not be ballistics tied to Mr. Kendrick. There wouldn't be fingerprints tied to Mr. Kendrick. There would not be witnesses putting Mr. Kendrick at the scenes of these crimes. There wouldn't be any video of Mr. Kendrick involved in the tragic murder of Donovan Thomas. We told you that this case was a Krispy Kreme donut hole. I think the phrase I might prefer is a nothing burger. But that's what we told you. That's what we promised you. And that is a bold promise for a defense attorney to make. And it's one you'll rarely hear. But we made you that promise. And we also told you what would happen. That the state was going to parade hundreds of witnesses through here to throw everything they could against the wall to see what would stick. And frankly, I would submit that nothing has stuck, that we have kept our promises to you. What did the state promise you? Again, a wolf pack with a ruthless wolf pack leader. It's late in the day. With a ruthless wolf pack leader that is here. And instead, you saw that man that wouldn't leave his friends behind. As the state has told you, as Mr. Sharp told you, the state has to prove these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And they have to prove every element of these charges beyond a reasonable doubt. So let's just talk about reasonable doubt for a moment. So when the state began today, they told you that you don't have to seek out doubt. They don't want you to think about doubt. But the standard is they have to prove their case to you by guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Can you see that? Okay. They have to prove their state to you by guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for each of the charges, for each of the elements. It can't be down here as highly unlikely. It is a very high standard. Possibly guilty, probably guilty, doesn't do it. It has to be guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The court is going to charge you. They're going to tell you, for example, that grave suspicion is not sufficient. And let me read you the charge you're going to hear. Facts and circumstances that merely place upon the defendant a grave suspicion of the crime charged, or that merely raises a speculation or conjecture of the defendant's guilt, are not sufficient to authorize a conviction of the defendant. Mr. Sharp already explained so much about the evidence presented regarding the tragic killing of Donovan Thomas. And I need to start by saying I have deep, deep sympathy for the Thomas family. I cannot imagine what it must be like to lose a loved one to gun violence or any type of violence like that. I myself have 5 children, and just the thought of losing a child tears me up. So I don't know what they must be going through. But I think the evidence that has been shown to you does not demonstrate in any way that Mr. Kendrick is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the killing of Donovan Thomas. And as Mr. Sharp so ably demonstrated to you, I think that there are others whose perhaps guilt or responsibility for Donovan Thomas's death has been demonstrated far more than my client's alleged responsibility. Briefly, to not belabor the point that Mr. Sharp brought up, let's talk about Kenneth Copeland, Little Woody. He was a character, right? I mean, he sat in that witness box, and he's a charismatic fellow, a very interesting guy. And he has certainly made the most of his star turn in this courtroom. But he never testified on this stand that Deamonte had anything to do with the killing of Donovan Thomas. He never testified on the stand that Deamonte and Garlington told him all this stuff, that Kendrick was involved in killing Donovan Thomas. He didn't tell you anything about, at the McDonald's, he learned anything about the killing of Donovan Thomas that Deamonte Kendrick was involved in. You didn't hear it at Sky House. You don't hear that from the stand from him. To the degree you heard any of that, it is in that June interrogation tape that was played to you. He was not under oath during that interrogation. And you heard the circumstances from Mr. Sharp, all the pressure that he was under. That was his 5th interrogation following the murder of Donovan Thomas, and the first time he comes up with this story clearly concocted by Deamonte and Garlington. How'd you like the testimony of Deamonte and Garlington? Oh, you didn't hear any testimony from Deamonte and Garlington. Everything Garlington allegedly said, you heard through other people. And again, why did he lie to police? To use Mr. Sharp's phrase, because I always steal from the best. He didn't want to wear the blue jumpsuit. He didn't want to go to Rice Street. He didn't want to be in the Fulton County Jail. He didn't want to face years of prison. He finessed the police. He finessed the police. He is a master liar. He is an admitted master liar. And he has methodologies he uses to lie and try to make it convincing. And he explained all of that to you. Again, why doesn't he want to go to Rice Street? Well, he told you what jail was like. On my cross, he explained what jail was like. When he most recently spent time in jail, he had a broken toilet full of feces. There were flies everywhere. He had no food to eat. He had to put his shirt over his face to act as a mask to try to keep the smell down. What rational person wouldn't do everything they can to avoid that? And of course, now's the next question. How do you know when to ever believe Kenneth Copeland? And I don't have a great answer for you on that. I can tell you what he said on the stand during my cross. He said, hand to God, I am telling the truth now. I have God in my heart. I have God in my head. Now, the state would have you believe about Mr. Copeland and Mr. Zachary, who I'll address next, that they got on the stand and they lied here. And they lied here, I'm sure they're going to say, because they're afraid of the defendants. And that is why they lie. But I'm going to argue to you that actually they got on the stand here and they told the truth. And they did it really almost in an act of bravery. Because when they get on the stand, the people they're afraid of is the state. They're afraid of the state. The state is the one that has the power to prosecute them. The state is the one that has the power to put them in prison. The state is the one that has the power to put Mr. Copeland in that jail cell with the non-working toilets and the feces and everything else that he is trying to avoid. But despite being afraid of the state, Mr. Copeland gets up here and tells you the truth. Quindarius Zachary, again, he lies to police. He lies to police repeatedly. And when I confronted him with those lies, why did you lie? He said, Yak never told me nothing. Yak never showed me nothing but love. Never showed me nothing but love. But he lied on him anyway. And why did he lie? Because Garlington came to him with a plea. And what's the plea? The plea is to blame other people for the death of Donovan Thomas. Who did Mr. Zachary see in that infinity? He never saw nobody in that infinity but Woody. The Texaco. Oh my gosh, there's the smoking gun. There's the smoking gun that shows that my client murdered Donovan Thomas. He's on video at a Texaco station a block away before the murder. Heaven forbid. He pulls up in that Texaco in a Pontiac. He leaves the Pontiac. He goes, you've seen this video 1,000 times. Well, maybe not that many, but it must feel like it. He leaves the Pontiac to go into the Texaco. And he buys some junk food in the Texaco, goes back into the Pontiac. He sits in the Pontiac. He talks to another car that pulls up. He gets back in the Pontiac, and he leaves in the Pontiac. Go in the back. Watch the video 1,001st time. You're never going to see him get in an Infiniti. You're never going to see it. How does he get in the Infiniti? Was there a witness that got up here and put him in the Infiniti? No. Do they have video from the surrounding area that shows him transferring into the Infiniti? No. I mean, presumably, he teleports into the Infiniti. I have no idea what their theory is going to be when they argue to you, but I'm going to be fascinated to hear it, because there's been no testimony about him in an Infiniti. How do we know it's an Infiniti in a drive-by? Well, the state is pretty sure it's an Infiniti. The state put on, this is one of my favorite experts of all of the state's experts, they put on an Infiniti identification expert who has worked with
Now, Mr. Wine
trying to avoid the fate of Mr. Stevens. If you are not in the car that did the drive-by, that Deamonte and Garlington told him all this stuff, that Kendrick was involved in killing Donovan Thomas, he didn't tell you anything about, at the McDonald's, he learned anything about the killing of Donovan Thomas that Deamonte Kendrick was involved in. You didn't hear it at Sky House. You don't hear that from the stand from him. To the degree you heard any of that, it is in that June interrogation tape that was played to you. He was not under oath during that interrogation. And you heard the circumstances from Mr. Sharp, all the pressure that he was under. That was his 5th interrogation following the murder of Donovan Thomas, and the first time he comes up with this story clearly concocted by Deamonte and Garlington. How do you like the testimony of Deamonte and Garlington? Oh, you didn't hear any testimony from Deamonte and Garlington. Everything Garlington allegedly said, you heard through other people. And again, why did he lie to police? To use Mr. Sharp's phrase, because I always steal from the best. He didn't want to wear the blue jumpsuit. He didn't want to go to Rice Street. He didn't want to be in the Fulton County Jail. He didn't want to face years of prison. He finessed the police. He finessed the police. He is a master liar. He is an admitted master liar. And he has methodologies he uses to lie and try to make it convincing. And he explained all of that to you. Again, why doesn't he want to go to Rice Street? Well, he told you what jail was like. On my cross, he explained what jail was like. When he most recently spent time in jail, he had a broken toilet full of feces. There were flies everywhere. He had no food to eat. He had to put his shirt over his face to act as a mask to try to keep the smell down. What rational person wouldn't do everything they can to avoid that? And of course, now is the next question. How do you know when to ever believe Kenneth Copeland? And I don't have a great answer for you on that. I can tell you what he said on the stand during my cross. You know, he said, hand to God, I am telling the truth now. I have God in my heart. I have God in my head. Now, the state would have you believe about Mr. Copeland and Mr. Zachary, who I'll address next, that they got on the stand and they lied here. And they lied here, I'm sure they're going to say, because they're afraid of the defendants. And that is why they lie. But I'm going to argue to you that actually they got on the stand here and they told the truth. And they did it really almost in an act of bravery. Because when they get on the stand, the people they're afraid of is the state. They're afraid of the state. The state is the one that has the power to prosecute them. The state is the one that has the power to put them in prison. The state is the one that has the power to put Mr. Copeland in that jail cell with the non-working toilets and the feces and everything else that he is trying to avoid. But despite being afraid of the state, Mr. Copeland gets up here and tells you the truth. Quindarius Zachary, again, he lies to police. He lies to police repeatedly. And when I confronted him with those lies, why did you lie? You know, he said, Yak never told me nothing. Yak never showed me nothing but love. Never showed me nothing but love. But he lied on him anyway. And why did he lie? Because Garlington came to him with a plea. And what's the plea? The plea is to blame other people for the death of Donovan Thomas. Who did Mr. Zachary see in that infinity? He never saw nobody in that infinity but Woody. The Texaco. Oh my gosh, there's the smoking gun. There's the smoking gun that shows that my client murdered Donovan Thomas. He's on video at a Texaco station a block away before the murder. Heaven forbid. He pulls up in that Texaco in a Pontiac. He leaves the Pontiac. He goes, you've seen this video 1,000 times. Well, maybe not that many, but it must feel like it. He leaves the Pontiac to go into the Texaco. And he buys some junk food in the Texaco, goes back into the Pontiac. He sits in the Pontiac. He talks to another car that pulls up. He gets back in the Pontiac. And he leaves in the Pontiac. Go in the back. Watch the video 1,001st time. You're never going to see him get in an infinity. You're never going to see it. How does he get in the infinity? Was there a witness that got up here and put him in the infinity? No. Do they have video from the surrounding area that shows him transferring into the infinity? No. I mean, presumably, he teleports into the infinity. I have no idea what their theory is going to be when they argue to you, but I'm going to be fascinated to hear it, because there's been no testimony about him in an infinity. How do we know it's an infinity in a drive-by? Well, the state is pretty sure it's an infinity. The state put on, this is one of my favorite experts of all of the state's experts, they put on an infinity identification expert who has worked with, infinity for years. And he can tell in any kind of grainy video that that car is an infinity. That's an amazing expert, but I'll take his testimony. That's fine. I think he's right. I think it's an infinity. And Mr. Kendrick is not in an infinity. And it's pretty hard to do a drive-by shooting if you are not in the car that did the drive-by. It is absurd. So again, there's no eyewitness testimony of Mr. Kendrick involved in the shooting. No weapons tying Mr. Kendrick to it. No ballistics. No fingerprints. No gunpowder residue. No DNA. Nothing. Nothing that you would expect to see. Now, the state has told you, well, you can look at circumstantial evidence. This is true. You can. And the state put up a dollar bill with some puzzle pieces missing. So, well, you can kind of infer that that's a dollar bill. And that's true. But don't go try to spin that dollar bill anywhere. because that dollar bill will not spend. And this evidence is not sufficient to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. Where's the cell phone data? Oh my gosh, you poor folks. You had to spend days listening to experts come in here and talk to you about cell phone location data. Where was Mr. Kendricks' cell phone location data, putting him there? They didn't show you any. Who killed Donovan Thomas? I don't know who killed Donovan Thomas. But I think Mr. Shart's theory has some merit. Let's turn to the allegations that YSL is a gang. The state had to bring in 5 different gang experts. You guys had to sit through 5 different gang experts to try to convince you that YSL is a gang. Now, they gave you the definition of a traditional gang, and these gang experts, who, as Mr. Sharp pointed out, all sit there and train each other in this insular little unit, but they told you, yeah, they're not a traditional gang. They don't meet the definition of a traditional gang. But lo and behold, we have another category of gang. It's a hybrid gang. Ooh, a hybrid gang. This is fascinating. Let's talk about hybrid gangs. What's a hybrid gang? Oh, a hybrid gang is whatever we say it is at any given point in time to fit our narrative. That's what a hybrid gang is. I use the term nose of wax. They can twist it any way they want to fit the group of people they want and say they're a hybrid gang. It's a catch-all. It's a catch-all used to throw all kinds of people together and say, well, you don't meet the definition of a gang, but because we are gang experts that train each other, we have decided you are a hybrid gang. Well, hybrid gang. So a hybrid gang apparently is one where, according to their experts, Bloods and Crips can live together in peace and harmony with each other to accomplish some type of goal. Does that make sense to anyone in here that has any basic understanding of the way that gangs work? You've had the state's own witnesses come here on the stand and talk about how ridiculous it is that you can say, that anyone can say, that YSL is a gang when you can have Bloods and Crips and Independents and all of these people be members of this alleged gang. As Mr. Shart talked about, there's none of the traditional gang elements. There's no beating in. Anybody can call themselves a member of YSL. You know, someone, I guess, alleged there might be a $25 dues fee or something ridiculous to that effect. But there's nothing that shows them together as a gang. Oh, well, wait. They are a gang because look at these pictures of YSL wearing green clothing. That must mean they're a gang. You guys are mostly in blue and black. You associate with each other here today. Are you guys a gang? The state is all in red today. Are they a gang because they're all dressed in red? Poor Miss Hingerty happened to come in red today. I guess she's a member of the gang as well. It is absurd. Lil Wayne has ESPN on his arm. ESPN. I guess Lil Wayne is surprised that he's a member of YSL too. My client's got ESPN on his body. No, that can't be because he was a football star and in his mind probably liked ESPN. It must be because he's a member of a gang called YSL. So it's wonderful that the state's gang experts have such insights into the mental thinking of my client and Lil Wayne and everybody else. Now the state may say, well, they're not a gang, even though they all dress in red today, looking quite dapper. Because, well, they don't have some criminal objective. Well, I don't know. Let's look at the way the state indicts people. The states around Investigator Viverito Investigator Viverito is the last person I can find anywhere on video or that you've seen on video holding that missing $500,000 watch. Did she steal the watch? Was that an overt act and furtherance of the conspiracy? Maybe I should go to a grand jury and try to indict this. It's the state gang or something ludicrous like that. Everything gang investigators see is viewed from the viewpoint of it must be a gang. Mr. Kendrick, look at the photo they showed you of Mr. Kendrick in the bandana shirt. Go back and look at it in color. The gang investigator says it's red. It is orange. Orange as the sun. You look at it, you decide, don't take my word for it, don't take their word for it, don't take the state's words for it. Use your own eyes. But when you're a gang investigator, everything has to fit the narrative. And that's the narrative. The snake on Mr. Kendrick's chest. Did he get that snake because YSL is a gang? Or did he get that snake because it represents the tree of knowledge in the Adam and Eve story? Well, they can tell you. I saw a mentalist Saturday night at a show, and this mentalist was amazing. This mentalist, you would think of something, and the mentalist would tell you, oh my gosh, you're thinking of a number between 1 and 50, it's 47. It's actually quite impressive. Apparently, Investigator Viverito and these other gang experts are mentalists. Maybe they will be at the next fundraiser I go to. I'd like to see some more of their tricks. Mr. Kendrick does modeling shots. So someone will say to Mr. Kendrick, hey, hold this hat. Oh, that's gang. The hat has a rat with a line through it. That's gang activity. We're sending a message to everybody. There's a photo taken outside at the time of a video shoot for music. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Look at that. Gang activity. There's photos of Mr. Kendrick wearing clothes that say slat outside of a recording studio. More gang activity. More people trying to pull themselves out, get into music, exercise their First Amendment rights. More gang activity. It's just exhausting, folks. All right. The racketeering charge. Racketeering is very complicated, as you all know. And the state explained racketeering to you. So I'm not going to go into all of the details of what it takes for you guys to find racketeering. Although I do want to repeat, you have to find each of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt, and you're not going to be able to do that with Mr. Kendrick. So I only want to focus on a few parts. Just bear with me. It's late in the day. Late in the day. Just give me a little more time. A few parts of the racketeering charge. First of all, the state has not shown a conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. What is a conspiracy? It is an understanding to accomplish or pursue a common criminal objective. Criminal. There's been no common criminal objective shown. What has been shown to you, and what was shown to you even earlier today? A series of independent, disparate acts over and over again. All kinds of different people committing criminal acts. I'm not going to argue to you that criminal acts were not committed, but they have not shown any relationship between these acts. They have not shown you anything that's shown it was done for a common criminal objective. That was not demonstrated. Again, as Mr. Sharp said, when Mr. Stevens was here, Tick, and Mr. Stevens was talking about selling pot, he did that for his own benefit. He's not paying up the ladder. And by the way, there is no ladder. Investigator Viverito told you because this is a hybrid gang, there's no structure to it. So I don't know how Mr. Tick is supposed to, Mr. Stevens is supposed to spread the money around. But it doesn't matter. They're going to say there's a common criminal objective. Nothing has been shown. Tick. I have to go on a side note on Tick, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Kendrick Mr. Williams, they were trying to avoid the fate of Mr. Stevens. Mr. Stevens, remember, I'd love you to go back and listen, read his testimony. Remember, look at your notes. At the age of 11, society threw him away. They threw him away. They tossed him in juvie, where he learned about gangs and drugs and everything else. Threw his life away. And he's trying to get his life in order again. And he's dragged back into this. State says one of the objectives was money and power. Where's the money flowing? Where's the money? Where's the money coming in? The state had the power of the courts, their subpoena power. They could have gotten Jeffrey Williams' banking and financial records. They could have subpoenaed his accountants. They could have gotten all of that to see the money flowing. Did they do it? No. Why didn't they do it? Well, I'm going to argue to you they didn't do it because there was nothing there. If they did it, it would undercut their case about seizing Mr. Williams' assets, about seizing $8 million worth of jewelry that he earned in the music business, about seizing all of those cars, about seizing the ring off of his finger and keeping it. We don't want to see those records because we don't want evidence that he earned all of this from his music and his hard work. No efforts of money and power as part of a conspiracy deriving from this gang. The judge is going to tell you in your instructions, mere association with an enterprise is insufficient by itself to establish a conspiracy to violate the RICO Act. Mere association. And that's what you have here, mere association. A bunch of guys that grew up together, were around each other, and that some of whom were trying to make it out, and some of whom were trying to help others make it out. Mr. Kendrick was trying to make it out. Mr. Kendrick would not let himself be thrown away like happened to Mr. Stevens. So I don't believe there's a conspiracy that's been shown beyond a reasonable doubt. What else has the state not shown? Well, they've not shown a lot, but I'm just going to focus on a few. The state hasn't shown that Deamonte Kendrick knowingly and willingly joined this conspiracy, and they must show that. Well, first of all, I understand their difficulty. I understand their problem. How do you show that you knowingly and willingly joined a conspiracy with a criminal purpose when one doesn't exist? So that's their first challenge. That's their first challenge. What did they do to try to show knowing and willing join? Well, he hung out with some guys that did some bad things. He allegedly is part of this YSL gang that's not a gang. And by the way, you heard testimony. Mr. Kendrick was signed to the YSL record label. So I guess he knowingly and willingly signed to the YSL record label. But that is not the same as knowingly and willingly joining a conspiracy. Depending on the outcome of this case, at least to this point, being signed to a record label, even a rap record label, is not a crime in the U.S. What else hasn't the state shown? They haven't shown a pattern of racketeering activity. And the key here is pattern. And part of the key to pattern is there has to be interrelatedness. And I'm sorry about the legalese. I promise I am. But I have to talk about it. These acts have to be interrelated. And instead, what you've seen for a year of your time is isolated incident after isolated incident. We're going to throw everything against the wall and hope something sticks. But even if a few things stick, if they're not interrelated, it is not a pattern. So I believe that when you look at all of the evidence, you're going to need to go back to the jury room. And I believe once you deliberate, you're going to find that Mr. Kendrick is not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of conspiracy to violate RICO. The last charges are easier to discuss and will go faster. Every count, counts 57, 58, 61, and 63. These are the last 4 counts against Mr. Kendrick. All of those relate or based upon drugs and guns found at Jeffrey Williams' house. Not a single witness, photograph, fingerprint, lab test, DNA, everything you can imagine. Nothing shows that Mr. Kendrick possessed any of those guns and drugs. Nothing. When they arrested Mr. Kendrick that day, did they test his clothing for any type of samples that there might be drugs or... No, nothing. Nothing. You didn't see any of that. Why was he arrested? Why is he arrested for drugs and guns? It's merely his presence at Jeffrey Williams' house that day. The judge is also going to tell you this, and bear with me while I read this, because it's too long to memorize. You are not authorized to find a person who was merely present at the scene of the commission of a crime at the time was committed guilty of consent in and concurrence in the commission of the crime unless the evidence shows beyond a reasonable doubt that such person committed the alleged crime, helped in the actual perpetration of the crime, or participated in the criminal endeavor. They're trying to show Mr. Kendrick guilty of those crimes just by being at Jeffrey Williams' house. I don't know about y'all, but when someone invites me over to their home, I do not ask before I go there, do you have drugs stashed away throughout your house? I do not ask before I go there, have you got a machine gun hidden under the couch in the basement? Have you got guns stashed in your cabinets? I don't ask that. And when I get to their house, I don't go looking for those things. Why did they charge him with this? Why did they charge Mr. Kendrick with this? Because, as I have told you, and from what you could see in this courtroom, Mr. Kendrick has done nothing but work on his music. But they have to drag him in. They have to suck him in to this vortex caused by their relentless, ridiculous pursuit of Jeffrey Williams. It is offensive and it is absurd, and presumably they felt they needed to do it to help out on the RICO case and to help get Jeffrey Williams. Briefly turning to each of those counts. Count 57, participation in criminal street gang activity. That is purely based on his alleged possession of marijuana and a firearm. But again, no one got up here and said Mr. Kendrick possessed any of the firearms or any of the drugs at the house. Now, here's what the state is likely to say. This is what I'm anticipating. Possession can be one of 2 ways, and you will hear the judge instruct you on this as well. It can be actual possession, you're holding it, or constructive possession. Constructive possession requires the state to show that Mr. Kendrick intended to possess those weapons, intended to possess those drugs. So when the state tells you that, I want you to please remember what I've just told you and think, what witnesses have you seen? What evidence has been presented that Mr. Kendrick intended to possess those weapons or those drugs or that marijuana? Nothing. Zero. Donut hole, nothing burger. The other 3 counts, 58, 61, 63, those are all marijuana or firearms. And again, I don't need to repeat myself. While I have had wonderful help from Ms. Hingerty and Mr. Apt on this case, for the most part, Deamonte only has me up here representing him. The state has an army of prosecutors, investigators, law enforcement to assist them. So, I mean, Deamonte only has David. And I just pray that I have done my best to slay this giant Goliath that is pursuing him. The state has not met their high burden of showing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I would even argue the state hasn't met these lower standards either. It's just not been done. I think when you go back there and deliberate, you'll come up with the same idea, the same conclusion. This case against Mr. Kendrick should have never been brought. That same Saturday night when I saw The Mentalist, a friend was saying to me, well, your problem is that the state has the last word. You're going to get up and talk to the jury, but then the state gets to go again. And they're great lawyers from the state. And they may not remember what you say. They're going to have the last word. And I said, no, you are wrong. You are wrong. The state does not have the last word. The jury has the last word. You guys have the last word. Each of you will decide the fate of Mr. Kendrick. Each of you individually will decide whether the state has met their high burden on each of these counts and on each of the elements of the counts to show that he committed this beyond a reasonable doubt. When you go back and deliberate, I believe that you can go back and send the message that targeting people, fixating on individuals who have managed to climb out of their circumstance, attacking people for their music and their lyrics and their art is wrong. Is wrong. Targeting only people of color for their music and lyrics is wrong. Winnie Lee, when he was on the stand, told you, he told all of us, even though I am a black man, not everything I write about is true or autobiographical. He has an imagination. Mr. Kendrick has an imagination. He has things to say about what he sees in the world around him, as does Winnie Lee, as does Jeffrey Williams. And the use of lyrics and artistic expression against individuals is wrong, it's un-American, and it shows the desperation of the state that they have to reach to that level in order to try to make a case against Mr. Kendrick. You can show that maybe, just maybe, we really do believe it when we tell people that through hard work, you can pull yourself up from wherever you came from. And that we, as Americans, as people, we believe in redemption. So I ask you to please remember that during and after the state's closing, to remember that when you're deliberating, to remember that each of you individually gets to make that decision of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm going to ask for the sale, because that is what you're supposed to do, right? And I'm going to ask you to go back there, deliberate, and come back with not guilty verdicts for Mr. Kendrick on all the charges against him. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for the last year of your life that you sacrificed to be here and fulfill your roles as citizens. I really appreciate it.
All right, let's take a short break, which is going to be our last break of the day. Then we will hear from the state again. Then I will release y'all for the day. We'll come back tomorrow. I'll give you the instructions. So let's take, maybe a 10, 15-minute break. It's going to be our last break for the day as well.
What was right in front of you. Now, and bear with us as a state.
Thank you very much. All right, Ms. Hilton.
Good evening. I know y'all tired. And I get the harsh responsibility of closing you out for the next couple of, for a little while. I ain't gonna tell you how long it's gonna be, but for a little while. And I just want you all to bear with me and bear with us as a state. Mr. Atkins told you this morning that this is kind of like that marathon. They were kind of at that last spot, right before the finish line. And I know this has been a long trial, and like every one of us has said, we thank you for your sacrifice. We know that we have taken you away from family, friends, trips, work. Maybe y'all didn't want to go to work, but from work to be here with us. And so we're going to ask of you just to bear with us for a little while longer. Now, Mr. Weinstein said something very interesting as he closed. He said something to the effect of, the state should be ashamed of themselves for targeting people of color. And I was a little taken aback. Why? Because I am a person of color. The majority of this prosecution team are people of color. And we are not targeting people of color. We are targeting gang members who decided to wreak havoc on communities in Fulton County. And the ironic part of the community that they violated were those communities were communities of color. See, no one rarely talks about the victims in this case. But the victims in this case, most of them are people of color. Because in Fulton County, you don't get to victimize anyone in our county without being held accountable for your actions. And what we're going to ask of you today is hold both of these defendants accountable for their actions. Because they are guilty of every single crime for which they are charged But as both Mr. Shard and Mr. Weinstein were talking, I was reminded that what is right is often forgotten by what's convenient. And see, in this case for them, it's convenient to blame Kenneth Copeland for the murder of Deamonte. Well, we're going to talk about that doesn't even make sense. For them, it is convenient to tell you that we have not met the elements of RICO because they're just not a gang. They just get YSL tatted on them. They just get snakes tatted on them just for the fun of it. That's convenient for them. But that's not the truth. And while it may have taken some time for us to get all that evidence out here, it took a while. Some days the evidence came out good. Some days the evidence came out bad. Some days I had to take a couple of breaks. At the end of the day, the evidence shows what is clear. YSL is a gang. YSL is an enterprise. They commit criminal street gang activity. They murdered Deamonte Thomas, murdered Chanel Drinks, and they're guilty. And then I'm also reminded of a story that a colleague told me a long time ago about someone who works as a border patrol officer. And this person worked as a border patrol officer for a number of years. And while they were working border patrol, a guy would come through the border with a red bike every day. And every day that that person would come through with the red bike, he had a basket on the front of the bike. And inside of the basket was some food. Now, every day, this guy would come through, and the border patrol officer thought something was kind of fishy, but he never found anything. He always found baskets with sand inside of it. This happened for a few months. Well, one day, the border patrol guy was leaving that job. He was going on to a new job, and he was at a bar. And who walked into the bar? The guy with the red bike. So the border patrol guy says to him, I'm getting ready to leave my job, but I'm interested. There's something was fishy about that red bike. What were you doing with that red bike? And the guy was like, nothing, don't worry about it. Congratulations to you. The night proceeded. The border patrol guy got some more drinks in his system and said, you know what? Can you tell me about this red bike? Because something just doesn't seem right. Every time I would see the red bike, it would have sand in the basket. Tell me what was going on. Guy said, don't worry about it. Finally, it's the end of the night. Border patrol guy is really complicated. He said, just tell me. I'm not going to remember what happened. You're not going to get in trouble. Tell me what you were doing. And what the guy said was, you know how every day you were focused on the basket with the sand? I was smuggling in a new red bike every single day. See, you were so focused on what was in the basket that you was missing what was right in front of you. And if you listen to what the defense counsel told you for the last about 3.5 hours that they argued, you're going to miss what's right in front of you. So what's sand in the basket in this case? First things first, stolen jewelry. APD, somebody stole this watch. No one stole the watch. The watch is left back in the house, but they want you to focus on this watch because if you focus on the watch, you're going to miss the evidence in front of you. Talked about no reports. Vimberito, she didn't write any reports. Well, what she told you is she wrote her information in the affidavits. Affidavits that get sworn before a judge. Probably better than reports because a judge has to actually read that information. But if you focus on the fact that Vimberito didn't write any reports, you're going to miss it right in front of you. Mr. Weinstein talked about length of time. We talked about that. Knowledge of co-conspirators. I think at one point in time, Mr. Shard said, Mr. Minor, who stabbed Lucci, he doesn't know Mr. Kendricks or Mr. Stillwell? Maybe not. But he knows Khalif Adams, who's the one who helped set up stabbing Lucci. Khalif Adams knows those two. Well, knows Mr. Stillwell. Khalif Adams knows Garlington. And so some way, somehow, though, Mr. Stillwell knew on February 9th that Lucci got stabbed. Well, how does he know that? How is that in a text message? That wasn't just because Mr. Myrick doesn't know him specifically, does not mean that they're not guilty of the crime of which they committed. They talk about witness credibility, specifically about experts and what our experts say. But if you go back to any of our experts' testimony, Belknap, Dennis, Gaither, Underwood, the things that they talked about, there were examples of it. They talked about YSL was a hybrid gang. It was Bloods and Crips, and they kind of got together. Well, we know that's true because Martinez Arnold's a Crip. Some of them, Mr. Williams was a Blood. You saw when he talked about sex, money, murder. You see them hanging out together. You see them committing crimes together. Mr. Kendrick and Mr. Arnold in a car with guns on their way to Trestle Tree. We can infer, go shoot it up. That's what they talked about when they said it's a hybrid gang. They talked about the music, and we're going to get to the music in a minute. They talked about the fact that gang members use their music in order to brag, promote what they've done in the gang. And we'll see examples of that in a moment. We talked about your duty earlier today, but again, just to be reminded, you're supposed to be a fair and impartial juror, honestly seeking the truth. You are not to seek doubt. So when you go in the back, you're supposed to say to yourself, what happened on January 10th? What is the truth about that? And is there evidence towards the truth? That is what you're here for. Seek the truth, you follow the law, and you deliberate. Now, I want to tell you this. If you go to the back to deliberate, and one of your numbers says, I'm not deliberating, I'm going into the bathroom, I'm not doing any of this, you need to bring that to the deputy's attention so they can bring it to the court's attention. Because you have a duty to deliberate. A duty to sit down, evaluate the facts, evaluate the evidence, and apply it to the law. So let's talk about the evidence of the defendant's guilt. So earlier this morning, Mr. Adkins talked to you about count 57, participation in criminal street gang activity. He talked to you about count 1, conspiracy to violate the RICO Act, and counts 50 and 51. I'm not going to harp on that again, but I thought it interesting when Mr. Weinstein said, well, we haven't proved count 50 and 51 and 57. You know, the state, they're all dressed in red. We are. Red's probably my favorite color. But you know the one thing that's different? We don't do criminal gang activity. And the court's going to define what that is. See, we're not here because people wear the same colors. They can wear all the greens they want. They can wear all the snakes they want. If they all want to tattoo YSL on them, that's fine. We told you it's not a crime to be a part of a gang. The crime is when you start doing criminal street gang activity, like murdering Donovan Thomas, murdering Chanel Drinks, murdering Jamari Holmes. That is what the violation is, not being a member of a gang. So you'll see, and we said it again, that on the left-hand side were the charges for Mr. Kendrick, on the right-hand side were the charges for Mr. Stillwell, and in the middle is what they were both charged with. So Mr. Kendrick is charged with possession of marijuana with intent to distribute. That's from May 9, 2022, when he was found running from Mr. Williams' house. Remember, the officer came and said that they both must have been out of breath, and he ran from the house. And the drugs and the guns that were found inside the house. The marijuana and the guns that were found in the house. So in order to prove this, we have to show that the defendant possessed with the intent to distribute any amount of marijuana. Marijuana includes all parts of the plant. What it does not include is the hemp products and all those other technical terms that I'm not going to try to pronounce for you tonight. We have to show that he possessed it, and it has possessed the marijuana or the firearm. We're going to talk about the firearm in a moment. Possession must be actual, constructive, sold, or joint. So we're going to tell you that it's not actual possession. No one caught him with the marijuana in the hand. We're going to talk about constructive possession. At the time of the alleged offense, he did not have direct physical control over the marijuana or firearm, but did knowingly have both the ability and the intention to exercise control over the marijuana. We know he doesn't have sole possession, so we're going to focus on joint possession. Defendants share possession of marijuana or firearms with at least one other person. I know Mr. Wine said we didn't have any evidence. We do. Pictures are evidence. That's direct evidence like we talked about earlier. This is inside of the home of Mr. Williams. That's the money counter that was sitting next to the Tupperware bowl full with the marijuana. That's the Tupperware bowl full with the marijuana. That's the more marijuana that was in that cabinet in that same kitchen right across from where the Tupperware bowl of the marijuana was. And those are the 2 guns that were found inside that area. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you heard the testimony that SWAT, when they came, did not immediately make entry into the house. It was like announced, it was loud. So I submit to you that they had the opportunity to put stuff away, to hide stuff, because they didn't just come in immediately, ladies and gentlemen. So you can take that into consideration as you deliberate. Possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. So the state must prove that the defendant had a firearm on his person or within arm's reach while committing a crime against or involving another person. For Mr. Stillwell, it's murder. For Mr. Kendricks, it's the possession of marijuana with intent to distribute. So how do we show this? On the left is Shannon Stillwell. That is Mr. Drinks inside of the vehicle. We know that Mr. Drinks was shot with a 40 caliber gun, possibly of a Glock, and we're going to talk about this Glock in a moment. So you can infer, although we do not have the gun, that Mr. Stillwell possessed the gun that shot and killed Mr. Drinks because he's dead and because we have the bullet. You can infer that. That's that circumstantial evidence. Your direct evidence is someone is deceased. You have bullets. We know those bullets come from a Glock firearm. So the only way you can infer that the shooter, Mr. Stillwell, possessed a firearm. Mr. Kendrick, again, you have the firearms inside of the house at the time when the house was raided. There were 2 found inside of that cabinet. There was the one that's found on this counter. Now, they're also both charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. You have to show for Mr. Stillwell, he has 2 counts. And interestingly enough, I was listening, Mr. Shard never talked about count 64. So, but we're going to talk about count 64. But count 52 is that he's a convicted felon and he had a firearm when he murdered Chanel Drinks. And in count 64, which is when he was apprehended, the gun that was found in the middle of the road, that we charged him with that weapon as well. And then again with Mr. Kendrick, that there were guns and drugs at Allison Drive on May 9th. And let me also say that in the indictment, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon is going to be a lesser included of what is charged. What is charged is a different charge, but possession of a firearm by a convicted felon is a lesser charge, and the court is going to instruct you, and you can find both of them guilty so long as you believe that both of them possess the firearm and they have been previously convicted of a felony. What do you have in evidence? You have State's Exhibit 60G and State's Exhibit 30Q. Both of those are the indictments of Mr. Stillwell, which he was charged with and convicted of a felony. So that is the felony that we're saying he should not have been in violation of, or he should not have possessed the firearm. As I just discussed, because he's a convicted felon, he should have never had a firearm when he murdered Chanel Drinks. For count 64, what do we have? Remember, this is on March 17th, after they fled from the Chick-fil-A, and remember, Trooper Campbell came in and said that he found the gun in the middle of the road. You saw the dash cam video where he kind of turned around and found this gun. Then we brought in Mr. Stillwell's former girlfriend at the time, Taisha Alexander. She said that she had bought the gun. That was her gun. That gun came back to Ms. Alexander. We were able to compare the serial numbers on both the gun that was collected and the receipt from Arrowhead Pond. And further, we played these wiretap calls for you.
Hello? Yeah. I don't know. China called like you didn't play on the hockey tape to the Baba house.
Yeah.
Why have me in the hockey
non-legit gun, which is that gun right here, he should never have ever even been in possession of it.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know what's going on either, because you know, usually they'll call, like how he got my gun.
Yeah.
They'll call and be like, come get your gun, but they ain't even call me. So I don't know if where my gun is, I don't know what's going on.
And again, this phone call was done on March 17th, the day he got arrested. The day Mr. Stillwell, got arrested. Now for Mr. Kendrick, you have in evidence State's Exhibit 487 BV, which is a certified copy of conviction of Mr. Kendrick. And again, because he's a convicted felon, he should not have been in constructive possession of any of these guns that are inside the home. So now, based upon what we have shown you, they are guilty of, right now, count 1, count 50, 51, 52, 54, 57, 58, 61, 63, and 64. So let's spend some time on the murders, because that is what we need to talk about. So for the murders, Mr. Stillwell is charged with count 2 and count 49, which is Donovan Thomas Jr. and Shamel Drinks. And Mr. Kendricks is charged solely with count 2, which is the death of Donovan Thomas Jr. You're going to hear the court read you an instruction about intent. Intent is every essential element of any crime must be proved by the state beyond a reasonable doubt. It may be shown in many ways, provided you, the jury, believe that it existed from the proven facts before you. It may be inferred from the proven circumstances or by acts and conduct, or it may be in your discretion inferred when it is the natural and necessary consequence of the act. Intent does not mean an intention to violate the law or to violate a criminal statute, but it means simply the intention to commit the act that is prohibited by the statute. So what are the elements that we have to prove for murder? That Mr. Stillwell and Mr. Kendrick caused the death of another person, here, Donovan Thomas and Shamel Drink, unlawfully and with malice aforethought. What is malice? It is not necessarily ill will or hatred, rather it is the unlawful intent to kill. You may find malice when the circumstances show that the defendant acted with deliberate intention to unlawfully take the life of another person, or where there does not appear to be significant provocation and all the circumstances show an abandoned and malignant heart. You often hear about premeditation. Some of you like watching these crime shows. The state does not have to prove premeditation to prove murder. So we don't have to sit and say you planned it out and you all mapped it out and that you knew you were going to kill Donovan Thomas or Shamel Drinks right at that moment. If a killing is done with malice, it is murder regardless of how briefly the malicious intent existed. So when Deamonte Kendrick rode by the barbershop and they saw Donovan Thomas sitting outside with his friends, and I'm going to submit to you, they started calling saying, yo, Donovan's out here. Let's go do this. That's enough. Or with Shamel Drinks, when Shannon and Garlington are sitting in the car and they're backed in and they see Mr. Drinks pull in and they realize, oh snap, that's the dude from the Shell Cal post. And they see him walking up and they decide at that moment they're going to get him because they're going to get revenge, they're going to get back. That's enough right there. Doesn't have to be days planned. Within moments, that is enough. No specific length of time is required for malice to arise in the defendant's mind. It may be formed in a moment, and instantly a fatal wound may be inflicted. If malice was in the defendant's mind at the time of the act of the killing and moved the defendant to do it, that is enough for the killing to be murder. Now, motive. The law says we don't have to prove motive. You want to know why? Because oftentimes I can't get into the mind of why someone wants to murder somebody. But here, and we're going to talk about it, we have some evidence of motive. Any evidence of motive has been admitted for for your use and determine the defendant's state of mind at the time of the killing. So you heard Mr. Atkins talk earlier about parties to a crime. I'm not going to go over all the principles again, but he gave you the example of the bank robbery, right? Everyone who is a part of the crime is responsible. So in this case, for Donovan Thomas, Mr. Kendrick, the driver. Mr. Kendrick, the state's belief, the state's theory, is that he alerted them about where Donovan Thomas was, because he was the one that was at the Texaco. He's the one that waited 40-something minutes for the Infinity to pull up. He's the one who got out of the Bonneville and went to the Infinity. He's just as guilty as the ones who pulled the trigger. Nard and Mrs. Jackson. He's just as responsible. And that's what parties to a crime says. Every person involved in the murder is just as responsible as the person who pulls the trigger, because you all act together. Now, we have in Chanel Drinks an individual that you kept hearing about, DeMarco Boyer. And someone brought up that DeMarco Boyer isn't on the indictment. Well, this is the law that's going to be instructed to you. Any party to a crime who did not directly commit the crime may be prosecuted for commission of the crime upon proof that the crime was committed and that that person was a party to it, even though the person alleged to have directly committed the crime has not been prosecuted or convicted, has been convicted of a different crime or degree of crime, is not amenable to justice, or has been acquitted. Mr. Boyer's day is for another day. We're not going to talk about Mr. Boyer today. Today, we're going to talk about Mr. Stillwell and Mr. Kendrick. You can look at presence, companionship, and conduct before and after the commission of the alleged offense. And those things may be considered by you in determining whether or not such circumstances, if any, give rise to an inference or the existence of a conspiracy. So what does that mean? You can look at what they did before, what they did during, and what they did after. And for both of those murders, we're going to talk about conduct before, conduct during, and conduct after. So let's talk about Mr. Donovan Thomas Jr. You heard from his mother, you heard from his father. He's from Atlanta, he had kids, he was in a gang, but he had started to kind of try to get into the music business. And he had started doing that by, one, he had a relationship with Rich Homie. Two, he had just put Lucci on, YSL Lucci. So he was trying to kind of turn that mark and do something different. What did you also hear about Donovan Thomas? That on the night that he was gunned down, that he was at the barbershop, getting his hair cut, his brother was there, and what were they getting ready to do? Meet with their daddy to go watch the football game. I think it was the Ravens and the Patriots. Don't quote me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the Ravens and the Patriots. And that's what he was getting ready to do. Spend time with his father. You know that he has a biological brother, but he also has a brother, which Kelvin Watts, who's super close to him, that they are brothers, but not biologically, but they share a brother, so they call themselves brothers. He said he was trying to get in the music industry. That's him with YSL Lucci. That's him with Rich Homie Quan. And so much so that after his death, Lucci had a whole album dedicated to him, Long Live Nut. And we know that Peanuts was his nickname. Now let's go over some timelines, because I think oftentimes we focus just on the murder, but there's some things that led up to that day that is very important for you to consider as you continue to live. So we know September 2014, Rich Homie Quan's father's barbershop shooting. Now, Mr. Copeland, we're going to talk about Mr. Copeland, told you on the stand here that him and Threat were responsible for that. YSL members responsible for shooting up the shop of a YFN gang member. Or shoot the father of a gang associate. Then, if you can recall, in all of the different interviews, majority of them, Mr. Copeland talked about this shooting at the Lakewood gambling house. He talked about it in mostly every interview when he kept on telling them about the history of him and Kelvin. And he talked about the fact that Kelvin had shot up the gambling house and shot up Doug's car. Then he talks about, in multiple interviews, a meeting at Cascade Skating Rink, in which him and Kel were there. Kel wanted Copeland to call Thug so they can maybe squash whatever issue that they had. And that when Thug, Mr. Williams, got on the phone, he asked Kelvin, "Are you going to pay for my car window?" Kelvin said no. They got into it, and it kept on going. You heard about the January 6th fight at Club Crucial, in which Copeland was jumped at the club, and then upon leaving the club, there was a fight with Bloody J, that some YSL members jumped on Bloody J, and that Kendrick and Arnold, they were arrested when they left the club. And that's going to be important, because when we talk about phone records, why we don't have some phone records from Mr. Kendrick. Then we had the January 8th shooting at TIG Studio, where Rich Homie Quan's purple truck was shot up. There was some alluding to the fact that Copeland did that shooting. I think Quindarius Zachary may have said in his interview that Copeland did that shooting. Then there was that blood meeting the night before the murder. Now, I know that Mr. Sharp played for you the clip in which Copeland says that the blood meeting was about him, but remember, the blood meeting was also about Mr. Williams. And he said that in one of his interviews, that the blood meeting just wasn't about him, but it was about him, Copeland, and Mr. Williams. Then on January 10th, you have the death or the murder of Mr. Donovan Thomas at 330 McDaniel Street. Then you have the retaliatory shootings begin immediately. See, the streets knew what it took the state and the government a long time to figure out. They went directly to who they thought killed Donovan Thomas. They immediately started shooting at Jeffrey Williams' family's house and Kenneth Copeland's family's house because they thought that both of them were in on it. Also, in the late morning hours, early on January 11th, Kenneth Copeland meets with the Atlanta Police Department, and many of the YSL members, they flee to Miami. You have more retaliatory shootings. Then, in April, between April and May of 2015, you have the incident at the Dunbar Center where Copeland is found with that gun. They don't arrest him then. He calls Gaither. Gaither speaks to him. They let him go. But once they did more investigation, they got the video surveillance from the Dunbar Center. They arrest him on June 10th. And then that's when he does the 9-hour interview that we'll discuss. In August of 2015 was Quindarius Zachary's interview. In September 2015, Shannon becomes the target of 2 shootings, one at the Green Store, the other one with Ms. Tierra Jones. In October 2015, arrest warrants are taken out for Garlington, Copeland, Sledge, and Stillwell. In November 2015, there was a preliminary hearing. The case was dismissed against Sledge. In 2016, the case was dismissed against Garlington and Copeland, and Stillwell received a bond. Between 2016 and 2018, there was some additional investigation and follow-up, and the indictment came in 2022. We're going to talk more about these dates, but I want to give everyone a general timeline overview. As Mr. Atkins talked to you about earlier, you determine the credibility of the witnesses. And I can't remember if it was Mr. Shard or Mr. Weinstein who said it, but they are absolutely right. We don't choose our witnesses. The witnesses and our victims are chosen by the crimes that are committed. So when you do your gang murder and you brag to your gang member friends that you murdered someone, then the person I have to bring in here to tell you what happened is the gang member friend. And the gang member friend isn't going to want to tell you in front of them what they told the police. So that's why I had to fight. Ms. Love got to fight. We got to argue with them back and forth because now they had to come in here and confront the people that they snitched on in front of them. So, and they know that. They know that none of these witnesses want to come in here and say what they told police. And they're begging on you to say, I don't know. I mean, he did swore an oath in court and said that he told the God's honest truth. Let's come and tell them God's honest truth in this courtroom. Maybe some of the stuff he told was truthful. Here and there, like he said, he's doing a little bit of truth sometimes. That's what he said, right? That he did that a little bit. And we'll talk about that in a moment. What's going to be important are prior statements. It is important because you as a juror get to determine the witness credibility, right? And this may be affected by you comparing and contrasting the testimony to statements or testimony of that same witness before trial started. You, the jury, can decide whether there's a reasonable explanation for any inconsistency in a witness's pretrial statements or testimony when compared to that same trial testimony. And we're going to actually apply common sense and reason to decide what testimony you believe or do not believe. So let's go through the evolution of Kenneth Rudy Cole. Let's take some time, all right? January 11th. This is hours after the murder. His girlfriend's house just got shot up, and they call him. Thorpe calls the girlfriend to kind of check in on and see what's happening with their shooting, and they put Copeland on the phone. See, on January 11th, when he walks inside, he real strong YSL, right? He's not trying to give up his friends. He want to let the police know, I didn't murder. Now, let me tell you something. I didn't murder Donovan Thomas. I'm going to tell you I was at my girlfriend's house. I'm going to tell you I went to the green stove. I went to McDonald's. He's not going to give you too much information because here, he's trying to still protect his friends. That's just common sense. The police don't really know what's going on yet. So when he first goes in, he's trying to protect his friends. But then we get January 28th. See, if y'all remember, y'all, this is after he gets out the shootout on the highway. See, this is after he came from the little pool party, and he on his way home, and they shoot at him at the highway. And remember, in this interview, he talks about, I believe, Shannon being upset with him because he didn't want to shoot back. So here, he's trying to tell them everything that YFN people are doing to him, but he's still not trying to give up his friends. They're his friends. But he's a little frustrated because everyone's blaming him for murdering Donovan Thomas, and everyone's shooting back at him, and he didn't do anything. Then we get February 20th. Now this was the worst one because that's when he's trying to come out the house to take his baby to the hospital, and they come down the street shooting at him. So now he's like, they are shooting at me, they shooting at my baby and my girl. Look, this is too much. And he tells them about what happened. Again, this is the interview where he really didn't want to give up who shot at him. He knew who did it, but see that gang street code is he still didn't want to give up the person who shot at him and his baby. And that's when Kirby was like, you're not going to tell me who just shot at you with your baby? Then the next day was February 21st. They had arrested him for a violation of probation. He was upset because they arrested him on a violation of probation. And Gaither talks to him, one, about the shooting that had happened the day before, and trying to get more information about the murder, trying to figure out what is going on. What is going on with this back and forth? Because by this time, and ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to go through that whole litany, we're going to call it Operation Planner shooting, but you heard evidence of all those shootings that were happening back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And they're trying to get a grasp of what is happening. And then we get to the 9-hour interview. So what happened between February and June? A lot. We got some back and forth shootings. Remember, Mr. Copeland went to jail for that violation of probation. He came out. He went to Henry County for a little while. And then on June 10th, he gets arrested for the gun that he had at the Dunbar Center back in May. And what's going on here? Mr. Copeland is tired. He been getting shot at. His family been getting shot at. Homes getting shot up. Remember Kenneth Hurst or Kenny Booth's house? His sister-in-law, his sister's child's father's home has been broken, getting shot at. And Shannon and Mr. Williams not talking to him. Remember Shannon, and he thought Mr. Williams was trying to kill him. That's everything he talks about in this 9-hour interview. And let me say this. If some reason y'all want to watch all these interviews again, y'all can. Y'all just got to let them know. I don't know if you want to sit there and watch a 9-hour interview again, but if you wanted to, you can. But in this interview, he is at the place where enough is enough for him. And I'm going to tell you about Mr. Copeland. I'm going to tell you about Kendricks. They are self-preservationists. What do I mean by that? They're going to not talk about what they've done because they don't want to go to jail. But if telling on them is going to get me out of jail, I'm going to tell you what's happened. Because I don't want to go to jail. He's absolutely right. He did not want to go to jail. But he's not going to lie to the police about what they did. He's going to minimize what he's done. And that's what he did in this interview for 9 hours. He minimized his involvement in some things, but he told everything that they did. And if you don't believe what he told the police, well, let's listen to what he told his girlfriend on the jail call.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. This time you want to wait. Come on, right? Yeah.
So in that call to his girlfriend, to the love of his life at the time, he tells them, "I need Dee to come in so they can move, so they can know what I told them is true. They had to verify what I said." So when he came in and said, "I will finesse the police, I will lie to them," no, because you wanted them to verify what you told them. And we're going to talk about how the police and Mike Sprinkle was able to verify what he told them. Let's listen to this June 16th, 2015 call.
They didn't go out with what's on, man. Who else gonna do nothing? Yeah. That's about
So what is he saying there? Why you put my name in the song? He know who did it. Because they all know who did it. They knew that it was Yak, Dua, Shannon, and Nard. And Kendrick is, Copeland is upset because he's like, why you put my name in the song? Put the ones who did it in the song. So they can stop targeting me. Now, let's talk about his trial testimony. You know, I actually do like rap music, kind of very popular belief. And there is an artist, Young G, and he has a song called Put On. And I'm telling you what Copeland and Zachary did while they testified here was they put on for YSL. They came in here acting all types of foolishness. And that's because they wanted to show their gang member friends, look, I'm still part of the conspiracy, y'all. I know I snitched on y'all back in 2015, but I'm going to try to help y'all out as best as I can. And that's what they did this entire time. They friends. They've been friends for a long time. They wear the same clothes. They lay together. What makes you think that Deamonte, when he got into that car at McDonald's and said, yo, let me tell y'all what they just did. Let me tell you what our homie, our boy for the last couple of years just did. They just killed Nut. Because the killer wasn't around. He was asleep at his girlfriend's house. So he missed the action. So you don't think when Deamonte get in the car, he's not going to say, yo, let me tell you what Shannon just did, Joe. They friends. And they want you to believe that Deamonte did not tell Copeland what happened moments after it happened? That don't even make sense. And we're going to ask you your common sense. This is them. And these weren't all taken in 2015, so some of these are older pictures. They look super young. This is how long they've been friends. Now, it was interesting when Mr. Shard asked, why we show you this video from 2009? Let me tell you why. Because Quindari's been around for a long time. Quindari's been around since 2009. So Quindarius knows about what's happening. See, we didn't just bring you stuff. I know some days you're like, why does the state bring me a video from 2009 in the park? It's to show the evolution of their relationships. Quindarius is a little bit different than Copeland. Because see, he's been around Mr. Williams much longer than Copeland's ever been in the picture. See, Mr. Copeland started coming around in 2014. Mr. Zachary's loyalty is a little bit different. He's been around since 2009. So when Zachary tells you in his interview, Doug ain't know nothing about that murder. Yes, he did. But his loyalty is a little different because he's been around. 2012. That's Mr. Zachary. You want to know why we showed you the video of them outside in the apartment complex? To show their association. Again, Zachary been around again for a long time. He real better than it. He rocked through YSL. So he has a motive to lie for Jeffrey Williams that Kenneth doesn't have as much of. In his interview. See, when Quindarius interviewed, he asked to come and speak to the police. And you're going to watch his interview because what both of them do in their interviews, both Copeland and Quindarius, and this is how you know they were telling the truth, they would correct the officers. If the officers were repeating something that was wrong, they would say, no, I didn't say it like that. I said it like this. That's what they would do. That's how you know that what they were trying to tell them, they were trying to be as truthful as they could so that they would get it right. They, meaning the police, would get it right. And again, same thing. He come in here talking about he wanted to take one of the investigators out, all types of nonsense. But again, putting on for YSL. And again, he's been around. They friends. They friends. And why would they lie on their friends? If they knew to make up stuff and make up lies, why would you lie and say your friends committed a murder? That doesn't make sense. Why lie? You could just say anybody made up the murder. If you were just lying, you don't want anybody to verify what you were saying, you could have said anybody committed the murder. But that's not what they did. So there were a lot of different witnesses that came in about Donovan Thompson murder, but we're going to talk specifically about these individuals. Investigator Thorpe, he was the original detective on the case. He took out those arrest warrants in October, and that was after talking to an individual by the name of Spencer Wright. He then turned his file over to Mike Sprinkle. Then we have both Dennis and Gaither. They were both, just because of the back and forth that they were investigating, just ended up talking a lot about the murder with these different individuals. And then you have Kenneth Copeland and Quindarius Zachary. And then what did Mike Sprinkle tell you? When he got the file, he reviewed it, and the first thing he did was realize that Spencer Wright was lying, and said, okay, I have to get rid of this information. And it was something that Mr. Shard said, which I found interesting. Mr. Shard said that Nicholas Robinson, a.k.a. Spencer Wright, is an example of individuals who would say anything to get out of jail. But the difference between Nicholas Robinson and Quindarius and Kenneth Copeland is that Mr. Sprinkle couldn't verify what Nicholas Robinson said. But he was able to verify what Quindarius and what Kenneth Copeland said. So, did Mike Sprinkle corroborate Kenneth Copeland and Quindarius Zachary? Emphatically, yes. So let's talk about the activity before the murder. And some of these are the videos, but there was no dispute about the Lakewood shooting in Club Crucial. And what you have in both of those interviews is that both Copeland and Zachary actually sat and talked about those shootings. I'm not going to play the video for you, just in an abundance of time, but we know that those two things at least were not disputed. So let's talk about the day of and the days after the murder. So what did Copeland tell you about that morning? What did the phone records tell you? I know that's kind of small, but you'll have the phone records in the back. That between 6:37 and 7:26, Copeland's phone was in the area of his girlfriend's house, right? That's QR's, Copeland's girlfriend's residence, which was on Maury. His phone was pinging in that area, and that's between 6:37 and 7:26. If you can recall, the 911 call for the murder came in at 7:22. At 7:26, he is still at his girlfriend's house after the murder. So this notion, when they say, well, Kenneth Copeland did it, I know somebody who could have done it, well, it wasn't Kenneth Copeland. The person who did it is Stillwell, Yet, Nard, and Deamonte. Because Kenneth Copeland was at his girlfriend's house at 7:26. Then he says he went to the green store. he travels down towards the McDonald's, like he told him. And here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, about cooperation and phone records. He doesn't know we're going to pull the phone records later. He doesn't know that Mike Sprinkle in 2016, almost 8 months after this, that we're going to pull the phone records to see whether or not what he's saying is true. I know he came in here and said, I got 2 phones, I had 2 phones, and all this other stuff. He didn't have 2 phones. Or if he had 2 phones, the main phone is the phone that he was calling his girlfriend on. You can look at the records. The records will show who he's talking to. He's talking to his brother and his girlfriend on the phone he's talking about. Cooperation, I'm not going to play it, but he says, if you just heard him say he goes out to the McDonald's.